welcome to the Fairweather Report. I'm Daryl Fairweather. I am Redfin's chief economist. I'm also the author of Hate the Game, Economic Cheat Codes for Life, Love, and Work. And today I'm going to be telling you all, oops, I'm on the wrong screen, about all of the latest economic and housing market news so you can be so informed about what is happening in the economy. And if you're thinking about buying a home now or one day, selling your home, this should all be very helpful information to know. I love answering questions, so feel free to put them into the chat whenever you feel like it. I will do my best to answer them as they come up. But let's get into it. I have a lot to talk about. So, the latest Redfin data, which we put out every single week, indicates that pending home sales have sunk to a 5-month low. That's seasonally adjusted. So, we're taking into account like variation in weather and season and all of that. And it's because mortgage rates have gone up. I don't know if you're aware of this, but mortgage rates have gone back up. I'll talk about why that is, but the reason is inflation, mostly. Inflation has a lot of different causes right now. You have the conflict in Iran, you have AI, but there's also this added complication of we have a new Fed chair that the market is reacting a little bit negatively to, Mr. Kevin Warsh. Maybe this is just a temporary anxiety the market is feeling. Change is hard. Going from one Fed chair, Jerome Powell, to Kevin Warsh, maybe that's difficult. But bottom line is that mortgage rates are up. And because mortgage rates have increased, buying a home has gotten less affordable, more expensive if you are borrowing. And that has caused this decline. The number of homes going under contract fell 3.7% week over week nationwide, the steepest decline since 2022, as would-be buyers pressed pause amid high mortgage rates. New listings ticked up. That's interesting. Even though buyers are backing off, sellers are coming to the table. I'm not sure if the sellers are just late to what's going on, because a couple of weeks ago, buyers were eager, or a little bit more eager, to buy because mortgage rates dropped for just like a little moment in time. Back when we had that memorandum of understanding with Iran, it looked like the war might be ending. Mortgage rates came down, buyers came back, and maybe the sellers are just like slow to react, but the party's over already, or at least temporarily over. We'll see what happens moving forward, because buyers have backed off because mortgage rates are back up. So these sellers who are deciding to list now, they're a little bit late to the excitement. So we'll see if that sustains. But yes, according to Mortgage News Daily, the daily average 30-year fixed rate mortgage is now 6.82%, which is near the highest level in over a year. It was 6.57% last year. And this is an interesting point, because for most of this year, mortgage rates have been below where they were in 2025. But now mortgage rates are actually higher than they were in 2025. And I think that matters, because now we're going to start to see these year over year comparisons with mortgage rates and with demand perhaps start not to look as good, because mortgage rates started declining this time last year. So now we have a lower mortgage rate to compare ourselves to and a hotter market to compare ourselves to, which makes right now feel weaker, even though, it's a 5-month low in mortgage rates, but it is the largest year over year decline in 5 years. And both those things can be true. Like, pending home sales have been going down a little bit each month, but because we're comparing ourselves to last year when we did the year over year difference, that year over year gap is bigger than what the monthly decline looks like, if that makes sense. But feel free to ask a question if that does not make sense. All right. Oh, you say the link tree is blocking my face? I'll just remove it. Thank you to Thailand tour guide for letting me know that. And the notice anyone watching can see me. I don't know what the notice anyone watching can see me means. So can't fix that, but I took out the link. All right. Let's move on to the next topic. So I talked about how mortgage rates are up, but what does that mean more locally, that mortgage rates are up and pending home sales are down? So real estate is always local. So like the market's going to feel different in different places. Austin is a place where there is plenty of inventory because there was lots of new construction during the pandemic, so buyers have lots of homes to choose from. In Chicago, Chicago was very hot earlier this year, but it's starting to slow down a bit. I think because prices have come up so much, buyers are like, it's gotten too hard for me to afford to buy a home because of all this competition and all the prices. So it's starting to cool down a bit from how much it was ripping earlier this year. In Nashville, it's similar to Austin. Buyers have the upper hand. San Diego is a bit of a split market right now. Move-in single-family homes are in short supply and still get a lot of offers, but condos, which a lot of condos were developed, especially in San Diego, like there a lot of multifamily housing was developed, and there was this window of opportunity when you could build like these kind of condo towers in your backyard as an additional dwelling unit, but they cracked down on that. Anyway, there's a lot of inventory, especially of small units in San Diego, which means that there's less competition for those units and that market's moving a bit slower. When it comes to affordability, the income needed to afford a home ticked up a bit in recent months, but it's still pretty flat. It's been flat since 2023. And that's important because incomes have been going up. So here's the income needed to afford a home. The income of Americans is slowly starting to catch up to the income needed to buy a home. Now, it's still much lower. You can see that pre-pandemic, the median US household income was actually higher than the income needed to afford the median priced home. That shifted in 2021 because of how high prices got. It changed even more because of how much mortgage rates went up in 2022, and we created this massive gap between the incomes that Americans earn and the income needed to afford a home. But that gap is slowly narrowing, and we talk about reversion to the mean in economics and statistics. In the long run, there will probably be a reversion to the mean where the income needed to afford a home continues to stay stable, whereas US incomes climb every single year by 2, 3, 4% and slowly catch up to the income required to afford a home. This is a long run projection that I have for the housing market in terms of affordability, that our Redfin economists have for the housing market, is that slowly over time affordability will start to improve. But I don't want to downplay that affordability is really bad right now. It got really bad in 2022, and it's going to take a long time to unwind that, to get us even just back to how things were in 2019. And even back in 2019, we were talking about how unaffordable housing is, how the middle class has been priced out. I mean, that wasn't entirely true because the middle income could afford the median priced home, but there was parts of the market where that definitely wasn't true, like the Bay Area, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., Boston. But now it's true nationally that like the middle class can't afford to buy a home, but it will start to reverse slowly. Okay, let's look at some questions over on TikTok from Brian Ray. From what I know, isn't this issue mostly zoning and regulations that make housing supply sticky? That is definitely my position, that zoning is a very big reason why home prices and affordability have gotten as bad as they are. It's not the only reason, though. I don't like it's like the way I think about zoning and regulations, like zoning and permitting when it comes to housing affordability, is that those are the things that we really should just get right because it's so cheap. There's no cost to upzoning. You just change the regulation from a lot being zoned for a single family home, a single individual home on a lot, to allowing for multifamily housing where you can put a duplex, a triplex, multiple units on that lot, and that increases supply of housing. And it doesn't cost the government anything. They don't have to raise any tax revenue to make this change that would increase the supply of housing. So it's kind of a no-brainer, and yet we don't do it because NIMBYs get in the way. They block housing zoning reform because they don't want more housing in their neighborhoods. They don't want those homes on large lots turning into multifamily units. There's lots of reasons for this. Sometimes they don't like the aesthetic change. Sometimes they think that having more housing would mean that their home would be worth less. Sometimes they don't want the traffic, implied traffic. I mean, traffic is its own problem that you need to solve through public transit, but sometimes that's the reason. Sometimes they don't want low-income people or the wrong kind of people being able to afford to live in their neighborhoods in these lower priced, more dense homes. So it doesn't cost us anything to upzone. The NIMBYs don't like it, but I don't think the NIMBYs should get a vote because they, for the most part, are homeowners who already have secure housing. That's why they don't see the benefit of building more housing. But upzoning and permitting reform, which means that you allow homes to be built quicker, it will definitely help. It doesn't cost us anything. But it's not going to fully solve the problem. There are reasons why we have less housing supply and there is demand that are much more structural. Housing is cyclical. And what that means is that when there is when the economy is doing really well and people have a lot of money to spend and they want to spend more money on apartments, spend more money on homes, builders dive right in and they build a lot of housing. These builders never anticipate that the good times aren't going to last forever and that by the time they're done building housing, every other developer, every other competing developer is also building housing. There will be more supply, which in and of itself drops down prices. And so you get these booms and busts in the construction industry, which means that builders start to get more risk averse. So we had this huge boom during the housing bubble of housing construction. The builders got burned so bad during the foreclosure crisis and the recession that made them less inclined to go all in the next time there was a boom period. So even if we had ideal zoning, ideal permitting, we would still have this problem of cyclicality of cycles, booms and busts in construction, leading to an undersupply of housing, which is why then you move on to the things that cost more money for the government to do, subsidizing new construction, giving money directly to builders to pay them to build. Sometimes people don't like that because they feel like developers or construction industry is rich already. Why should the government even be giving them more money? But that's like the best policy for addressing this boom and bust in the construction industry. And if you don't want to pay the developers directly, you could start a public developer where the government takes over that role. They're still going to be using private developers. They're just going to be like under an umbrella of a public developer. But it also helps address this problem that we don't build enough during the down times in the economy and the housing market, which leads to this chronic undersupply. Other issues that restrict the housing supply include a lack of labor, exacerbated by our immigration policy. However you feel about immigration, you can't deny that 30% of construction workers are foreign born. You also have materials. Materials are getting more and more expensive, just like everything is getting more expensive. So labor, materials are also things that we should be addressing through policy to make us able to build lots more homes, to narrow this gap between the income needed to afford a home and the incomes that Americans actually earn. Now, you could also think about policies that directly address how much income Americans earn. Like that would be beneficial to people for multiple reasons if they could have more money in their pockets. And you could address that through like tax reform, for example, to give more money to middle income Americans. But in a restricted housing supply where you have single family zoning where builders can't build, that ends up driving up the price of housing even more. So if you really want to make housing more affordable, yes, it's nice to focus on income, but you also have to focus on the supply side. That was a very long tangent, but we're all on the same page here now about how about why this is, why the income needed to afford a home is so much lower. Or sorry, the income required to afford a home is so much higher than the median household income and how we got to this place. All right, more questions. Somebody is spamming on TikTok, but whatever. Someone said there is not a housing shortage, there is a home ownership shortage. Not sure what you mean by that. Maybe what you mean is that we should have more homeowners in this country. This was the philosophy of the early 2000s. There was this big push to make every middle income American into a homeowner, and that's how we got subprime loans. And we all know what happened with subprime loans. So I think that like we don't need to artificially create homeowners, but we want to make sure that people are in an economic situation where they feel like they have good choices between whether they want to own a home or whether they want to rent, and they have the information that they need about those two choices, and they can make something that makes economic sense for them. I don't think like we necessarily need to design our economy around homeownership. Some people want to rent, and renting is beneficial if you're the kind of person that bounces around from place to place. Owning doesn't really make sense, but we should at least have an economy where, if you earn a decent salary, you should feel like homeownership is attainable to you. Yeah, I guess what Riley Seaberg 92 is pointing out is that we do have a lot of supply right now, or maybe you could call an excess of supply of like condos and apartments, but they're not in the places that people most want to live necessarily. So a lot of condos and apartments were built during the pandemic. It still wasn't enough to really make up for the lack of housing that was built pre-pandemic. But right now, we do have a lot of condos for sale in places like Austin, Florida, Arizona, and parts of they're like their little pockets too. There were some condo development in Oakland and California. I don't think of California as being a place that built a lot of dense housing, but they did build there. So during the pandemic, because mortgage rates were so cheap and there was this demand for housing, builders did build a lot of dense housing in the places that were zoned for it. The issue, though, is that they really went all in on 1 bedroom and 0 bedroom units, because from the perspective of a builder, it is on paper more profitable for them to just jam as many units as they can into a building. And it's really expensive for them to add extra bedrooms because you need windows for those bedrooms. It's really expensive to add extra bathrooms because you need plumbing to those bathrooms. So all these builders, they were like kind of doing the math, and they decided to go and focus on 0 and 1 bedrooms. Because everybody did this, we have an excess supply of 0 and 1 bedroom condos and apartments in some parts of the country. And that's why some parts of the country, the housing market is like so sluggish, because it's like really hard to offload these condos when rents have been stable. The difference between owning a condo and renting an apartment, like those are pretty apples to apples things. You can rent from a condo owner, for example. Like it's easy to do that. So when people go and do the math and they look at how much does it cost to rent an apartment versus how much does it cost to own that condo, it's very easy to see that the monthly rent is going to be less than the monthly mortgage payment because of how high mortgage rates are. Mortgage rates, as I said before, 6.8% for a 30-year fixed rate, when during the pandemic it was only 3%. And you have this market where people who owned condos or any kind of home during or before the pandemic were able to refinance into these record low mortgage rates at 3%. So their monthly mortgage payment, let's say for like a $300,000 condo, it might be $1,000. They might be able to find a tenant who's willing to pay $1,200 so that they can rent that out and get a profit. But if they were trying to find a buyer, that buyer would not be buying at 3% mortgage rates. They would be buying at nearly 7% mortgage rates. And I'm not going to, I could do the math, but I'm going to just say that, if you're buying at 7% mortgage rates, then maybe you're paying $2,000. I just don't want to create another tab and waste your time trying to do the math, but you get it. Like if you own a condo that you owned during the pandemic, you can rent it out for more than your monthly mortgage payment, because your mortgage payment is like at 3% rates. But you're not going to be able to find a buyer to buy it because they're up against these 7% rates. So you're going to have to lower your price and take a loss on it, but you can just hold on to it and rent it out. So this is like kind of the distortions that we're seeing in the condo and apartment market right now, which make it seem like, oh, we have all of this housing for sale, the housing shortage is over. Not really. Just because it's very easy right now to find 0 and 1 bedroom apartments or condos for sale doesn't mean that they're appropriately priced, because these owners don't want to drop their prices because they can still rent them out at a profit and hold on to their 3% rates. And then there's the other issue that if you are a family, let's say you have like 4 people in your family, a 0 and 1 bedroom apartment or condo doesn't do you any good. Like, are you going to cram everybody into that? It still feels like there is a shortage of housing, because there is a shortage of housing that is appropriate in that for those families. So there's some chatter online about how like there's no housing shortage. Look at all the homes that are for sale. I tell you about how there's 47% more homes for sale than there are buyers willing to buy them. But the reason for that is not because the housing shortage has gone away. It's because there were all these distortions that happened during the pandemic with mortgage rates that are still unraveling and causing a lot of homes to sit on the market because the owners aren't willing to sell them for anything less than what they bought them for, because why would they when they have super cheap mortgages? Okay. What else are people talking about? Oh man, so many comments. It just keeps going and going. At least on TikTok. Instagram is quiet. But yeah, so many comments on TikToks. Okay. All right, I'm just going to move on because I can't read all of these. So let me just move on to my next topic of discussion. Oh, we talked about starter homes. So Starter homes, like 1-bedroom condos, fall into that category. Those are getting more affordable. The income needed to afford a typical US starter home is down 1.5% from a year ago. So that's good if you're in the market for a condo. But a lot of these starter homes are really small and like not really the kinds of homes that people want necessarily. So it's more complex. It's more complex than just like the top line numbers. All right, what else? So a couple of weeks ago, before I went on vacation, I was on Planet Money Live, and they edited that live interview into a indicator episode. So go check that out if you want to hear more from me. Highly recommend it. I just want to talk about my favorite question that I got during the interview. So somebody asked from the audience, so the live Q&A, when is the right time to sell your home? And my answer was, it's not like based on, oh, you should sell your home when the prices are high, or, when it's a seller's market, yada, yada. You should sell your home when that home is holding you back from living the life that you want to live. Okay. And this is something that I think you can apply to any decision of when to stay and when to move on. So when I bought my first home, it was in San Diego. I was working in this job in San Diego in consulting. I like got some pressure from my family, like, oh, you're making all this money, you should buy a house. I did, but I wasn't really being honest with myself about that job. I did not like that job, and buying this home, it felt like it was locking me into place in San Diego at this job, because I couldn't just leave this job and find another job in San Diego. There aren't a lot of economist jobs in San Diego. So I decided to sell that home in order to take a new job in Seattle. And the reason I sold that home was not like a financial decision in the traditional sense. It wasn't an investment decision because I lost money because I sold it so quickly. I paid, real estate transaction fees and had to pay money for the privilege of buying and selling that home instead of making money. But staying in that home would have held me back from living the life that I want to live. So take that as a lesson for the housing market. I talk a lot about what's going on in the housing market, but it always matters more what's happening to you personally. And, don't try to time the market, try to time your life. If the home is holding you back, then it's time to sell. And this applies to like relationships, it applies to jobs. If you are being constrained from living the life that you truly want to live, then that's when it's time to move on. It's not about the money. Shout out to Ramit Sethi, the author of I Will Teach You to Be Rich, but he like talks about this a lot, and a lot of people talk about this, how money is supposed to enable you to live the life that you want to live. So don't get so fixated on getting the best price or timing the market. If you're going to fixate on anything, fixate on like, is this the life that I want to live? Am I like living my best life as a, is that a trendy saying anymore? I was going to say as the kids say, but I'm old, so I don't even know what the kids say. But don't let your home or anything stop you from living your best life. If you have an option available to you that will get you closer to that life you want to live, even if you're going to take a loss on selling your home, or, you're going to be out of income for some time, if you're thinking about living a job, just frame it that way, not about just the money, because money is just money on paper. Like, it doesn't mean anything if it's not enabling you to live the life you want to live. All right, that's enough. I don't know what you call it, self-help. I don't know. TikTok is popping off, but I can't keep up. All right, next story. Let's talk about Kevin Warsh. Kevin Warsh. So I was on vacation last week, so I didn't talk about this as it was happening, but it's still relevant. Last week, the Fed kept interest rates steady for a 5th consecutive meeting because of inflation pressure, really. You have the war in Iran, you have tariffs, you have AI fueling the economy and causing it to become hot. So Warsh came out and said that, not just Warsh, the Federal Open Market Committee, they decided to keep rates the same. But Warsh is very interesting because he said he's not saying much. He's very what's the word? Concise, pithy. I think pithy is the word I'm going for, because he didn't say much because he's not giving forward guidance. So he's not like Jerome Powell, where he's like walking you through like, here's where we see the economy headed over the next year, and here's what we're thinking, and obviously we're going to be data dependent, yada yada yada. Like, Jerome Powell had this very soothing way of talking to the markets. You might call him a market whisperer. But Kevin Warsh is much more concise, and punchy. And it seems like markets didn't like that because, there was a sell off and mortgage rates went up. And this, I think, is like what might have caused it. Warsh said, "Let me reiterate: there is no soft inflation target. There is no soft implicit target. Not on this committee's watch." I'm not sure if he said it like that. I'm gonna punch it up. There's only a target, and it's 2%. And this is like very significant because it's basically Kevin Warsh saying, come what may, we're going to get inflation back to 2%, and I'm going to do it no matter what. Even if it causes a recession. I mean, he didn't say that explicitly, but that's like kind of what he's implying here. He's going to do whatever it takes to get back to 2%. 2.5% isn't good enough. 2.2% isn't good enough. We're getting to 2%, at least in terms of the long run average. That's his goal. And Warsh, this is what we mean when we call him an inflation hawk. Like, he cares about inflation more than anything else. The Fed has this dual mandate where they're supposed to balance unemployment to inflation. But there's definitely a group of economists who feel like inflation comes first, and then you can worry about unemployment. And by saying this, that there is no soft inflation target, not on this committee's watch, it's 2% or bust, he is doubling down on his hawkish ways. And it's so interesting because this is probably not why he was appointed, right? I mean, I don't know. Like, the president criticized Powell for increasing rates too much because that meant that mortgage rates went up and he wanted to make home buying more affordable. So he put Warsh in after criticizing Powell. But Warsh is doing just what Powell did, and you could argue that he's doing it more harshly and more directly. And I think being an ideological inflation hawk, I'm not an ideological inflation hawk, but I respect it. I respect people who mean what they say and stand on it, even under social pressure to do differently. And Kevin Warsh is that guy. Whatever you want to say about him, he's that guy. And markets did not react well. Is there actually, what do I have to say? Well, we know that mortgage rates went up. Let's see. What was the S&P 500? What did the S&P 500 do? 1 month. Well, I guess it went back up recently, but last week it went down. So the market didn't really like what he had to say there. But, I still respect it. And I wanted to point out this Warsh op-ed that he wrote in 2021, which I think gives some more insight into why he's acting the way he is. Before that, let me hop over and see the comments. Lux F90 says Trump picked the wrong guy, smiling, laughing face. I mean, I think he picked a fine choice that the markets would be like okay with. The wrong guy, I mean, he wasn't going to find the right guy. I don't think there was any world where he could have picked a Fed chair who was going to do exactly what he wanted them to do. Like, that was not going to happen. They weren't going to get confirmed. So anyway, Lux F90 says 5 years and they have never reached their targets. True. The Fed has been above this 2% target since the economy reopened after the pandemic and inflation went to like 9%. We have been above this 2% target since then. So 2022, it's been like 4 years. 4 years and we have not hit this target. It's starting to drag on a bit. If it drags on too long, then the US economy loses credibility. And so this is an op-ed that Kevin Warsh wrote in December 12th, 2021. So even before like the economy was fully reopened. I guess we all got vaccinated, or at least I got vaccinated. I got vaccinated, if that tells you anything about me. So we got vaccinated like what, in summer 2021. So by December 2021, I guess things were reopening. And Warsh wrote this op-ed that said the Fed is the main inflation culprit. I don't know if I'm saying things weird. The Fed is the main inflation culprit. The central bank has enabled price increases that may soon pose a risk to financial stability. So, I mean, I think that like Warsh was right in a sense that the Fed did not react to inflation quickly enough. The inflation that we were all calling transitory, myself included, like I was kind of like hope casting that the inflation would be transitory back in 2021. I wasn't transitory, stuck around, still here right now, maybe for different reasons, but still here. So Warsh was right about that. It didn't really cause financial instability. So I guess he was wrong about it really being such a problem that it would cause financial stability. But I think he's still worried that if inflation remains above its 2% target, it will, or it could, it risks putting our entire financial system into like a catastrophic situation. And the logic behind that is that the reason why we have this 2% target is for credibility. So all the global investors believe that the US is capable of reining in inflation when it needs to. If we don't rein in inflation when we need to, then global investors will lose faith in the US economy and pull out of the US economy. And then we risk, losing dollar dominance. We risk treasury rates increasing significantly, which would increase mortgage rates significantly. And we would just all become poorer simply because the Fed didn't do their job. So Kevin Warsh, he's here to do his job of getting things back to 2%. And it might be painful in the short term. Markets might not like it, but he's standing on business. And I think that's a valid position. We don't know how long it would take of us being above 2% inflation for the global economy to lose faith in the US economy. Is it 4 years? We're at 4 years now. Is it 4 years? Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? How long can we do this, staying above our target and maintain our credibility? But the moment that credibility is lost, bad news, bad news. So not enough people care about these tail risks. Tail risks are hard to comprehend. A tail risk is something that is unlikely to happen, but could happen. US collapse because of a lack of faith in the US Federal Reserve. It's one of those tail risks. But Kevin Warsh is here to, make sure that doesn't happen. And, I don't agree with everything he writes or everything he says, but respect that. I really want to know podcast says, what's good, sis? I hope you had a restful break. I did. I went to Los Angeles, where I'm from, spent some time in San Diego. There was a heat wave, which, is probably uncomfortable for a lot of people, but I was at the beach and the pool the whole time. So it was a good time to visit. Nothing went wrong. I'm always afraid of something going wrong with a vacation, especially because I have young kids, a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old. Last time we went to San Diego, our flight was delayed until midnight, and then we got on the plane and they kicked us off the plane at midnight because the pilots had been awake for too long or something, and it was just the worst. So nothing catastrophic happened, but now I'm back. Okay, Cloud Virtue says, do you think there's a sentimental disconnect between what is economically viable within the American economy and what consumers feel they deserve? What is the current risk of potential labor strikes? Is there a sentimental disconnect? What comes to my mind when I hear this, and I wish I had a good visual. When I was at MIT, I took this class on foreign trade. I don't know what visual to put here. I took this class about trade, and it talked about how, different economies, their citizens have different expectations of what the government should do for them. And in this class, the professor was arguing that in France, the workers have become too entitled. Not sure if that was his political opinion, but I mean, he had some good economic, data to show that the French citizens have become so entitled to so many government services that France was kind of stuck in this economic stagnation because of it, because the government had their hands tied to give all of these entitlements to French citizens, which meant they couldn't actually invest in the things that would grow their economy. So conceptually, you can't have an economy where the citizens get over entitled to government money to the point that it restricts the government. I don't think that's where America is. America is not France. America is nowhere close to being France. And also, you could argue in the other direction, maybe it's corporations who have become too entitled to government money and become too powerful and too monopolistic, and that's holding back the economy. So you can have these different kinds of expectations that are put on a government that can be beneficial or restrictive to economic growth. I'm not sure where we are. I have to give that some more thought. And yeah, as I really want to know, finding out, please like, share, and subscribe. Hit that, I'm going to do the thing. Hit that like button, subscribe, turn on notifications. I'm Daryl Fairweather. These are my channels. Go subscribe on YouTube. That's the best place to keep updated on my live streams and all of my other videos. But also share, tell your friends, yada, yada. Okay. Let's see what comments we got over on TikTok. What do you think the market wants currently for inflation to ease or unemployment to ease? Uh, Inflation. I think inflation is the thing that everybody hopes eases, because if inflation eases, then rates come down, and everything just becomes more affordable. I don't think that. So when you say the market, I'm assuming you mean like the people with the money, because they're the ones who bet on the market, not the people who aren't participating in the market, like the workers. I mean, some workers participate in the market, but the market is mostly, the money holders. I think that they care more about inflation in this moment, because inflation is a thing that's been running hot for so long, and making everything expensive, especially borrowing expensive. But I don't think they're going to get their wish, unless, I mean, they're not going to get their wish easily. You have to raise interest rates in order to get inflation down, and that's not going to make borrowing cheaper. It's going to make it more expensive in the short term, hopefully more affordable in the long term. I guess maybe what you're asking is does the market, would the market like it if Warsh decided to cut rates instead of keep rates stable? I don't think they would have liked that either. I think if Warsh came out and said, I'm going to cut rates and just make interest rates go lower because the American people need better affordability, I think the market would have been like, what is he saying? This is not the Kevin Warsh that we know. This is not the Fed that we know. And they would have freaked out even more. I think the mild freak out over this last Fed meeting was just like kind of how abrupt it was. And I think they were used to being kind of coddled and coaxed into a place of stability, and Warsh's communication style was just more abrupt and direct than I think what the market was used to. And I think the reason that mortgage rates are higher now, have stayed high, is not necessarily because of Warsh's comments. It was what's behind the comments, that the war and the conflict in Iran is still going on, that there aren't any signs of the labor market weakening in a significant way that would justify a rate cut, that AI is inflationary in its inflationary era, as you want to say. I made this visual a while back. Oops, where is it? Oh, here it is. I should put this at the end so I can find it. I made this visual a while back to kind of tell you what I mean by economic eras. So right now, inflation is in its like build data centers, run natural gas era, which increases growth because it's a lot of investment, but also increases inflation. So yeah, I think that Warsh did the right thing in the meeting. He just said it in a way that people are having a hard time swallowing. Yeah. Oh, and yeah, buy my book. I'm supposed to plug it. Thank you for the commenters for reminding me to plug my own book, Hate the Game, Economic Cheat Codes for Life, Love, and Work. Endorsed by Stephen Levitt, author of Freakonomics, Roger Myerson, Nobel Prize winner, and for game theory. This is a book about using game theory in your everyday life, and it's endorsed by the economist who won the Nobel Prize for game theory. So this is legit. This is not. I'm not just selling you some empty book where it has a nice cover and there's nothing of substance in it. I got a lot of people to vouch for there being substance. And like and subscribe and follow my channel. I'm also Redfin's chief economist, so if you want more housing market insights, you can check out Redfin News. All right, enough with the plugs for now. Let's go over to Instagram. Do I got any comments on Instagram? Nope. TikTok. Oh my gosh, so many. The war premium is still surging through the market, which makes inflation hard to ease, said Divine. I agree. Brian Ray says, do you think this trend is something that's cyclical or becoming structural? I think that the higher inflation is structural. And this is like my visual for explaining why I think the inflation is structural. So, I mean, cyclical, I don't even know if that's the right word. I think you mean like temporary. It seems like there's a breakdown in global trade happening. That's what this is supposed to symbolize. That is sending inflation higher, but is also hampering growth. This is what you call stagflation. We are in this era in our economy where there's a lot of investment in AI infrastructure, and that increases growth and inflation. That's represented by this little data center factory here. And these are long-term trends. Like these are secular trends. I call them economic eras, but the econ term is secular trend. So they will last like several years. It's going to take us, I think, several years to build out our data center infrastructure, maybe longer, which could keep us in this phase. I mean, the whole AI thing bubble could burst, so maybe this era gets cut short. But my view is that what we're experiencing now in the economy is more structural than temporary, and I'm kind of on board with Kevin Warsh his take on this inflation. That's not going to solve itself. The Fed has to do it. It's not going to go away its own. The way the Fed addresses it is by keeping rates higher longer. Okay. Any other things? Questions? Brian Ray asks, what's your opinion on the trends amongst unemployment amongst young adults? So there's this debate happening right now. Do I have something on this? Let me see. Young people unemployment. Fred. All right, let's look at the unemployment rate for people 16 to 24 years old. I put it over a 5-year period. So the unemployment rate for people 16 to 24 years old is elevated above what it was. Let me go to 10 years. Oh man, the pandemic really like screws with this y-axis. But yeah, I mean, it's elevated, but it's actually not that elevated compared to where we were in 2019. 2019, the unemployment rate for this group of people was around 8%. Now it's around 9%. So it is elevated. People have attributed this elevation in unemployment for young adults to AI because entry-level roles are kind of going away. But I think I think the larger factor, I think AI could be playing a role, but I think the larger factor is high interest rates because companies aren't opening up new roles because they don't have the money to open these roles because they don't have them because it costs too much to borrow money at these high interest rates. They don't want to lay off their existing workers. That's why we're in this low hire, low fire labor market. So they hold on to their older workers and they don't open up new positions for younger workers because they just don't have the money for it. And that's just like kind of the situation that we're in right now. Interest rates are high, inflation is high, companies they're trying to figure out how to cut costs and get slim. They're using AI to do that. Like AI is enabling them to cut these roles or to limit job openings because they're like, okay, well, instead of hiring workers, we're going to use AI, substituting away from labor to capital, to put it in econ terms. But I think even without, it's like hard to untangle it because AI is somewhat contributing to high interest rates. But I think that the interest rates are like the big thing right now. And AI is part of that story, but it's not the only part of that story. All right. What do you think is supporting the US economy right now? The stock market, AI, or the bond market, etc.? I mean, the bond market is like fundamental to the US economy. So like the fact that global investors still want to buy US bonds is something that is making the economy stronger. It's keeping rates lower than what they would be if those investors didn't want to buy US bonds. I think AI is like a big story keeping the economy afloat because when you look at just GDP, these capital expenditures, these investment expenditures are contributing like a large amount to AI. But like just in general, I feel like the economy, it's still growing, you know, like pre-pandemic, I'll go back to my visual. Pre-pandemic, we were in this period of stagnation. We had low growth and low inflation. And I put here some of the factors that lead to this. You can go watch this. I have a video about this chart on my YouTube channel. It's called Where the Economy is Headed Next. It's my most recent long form video if you want to check it out. But pre-pandemic, we had low growth, low inflation. Now we're more in this orange quadrant where we have high growth and high inflation, which is actually like better in a lot of ways than being in this low growth, low inflation place. Because yes, it's nice that everything's cheap when you have low inflation, but if there's low growth, it's hard to find a job. It's hard to like get raises. We had this like brief period when the pandemic reopened where a lot of people were getting higher incomes, and I showed you how wage growth is increasing faster than home price or home affordability, which is making homes more affordable. So that's a good thing. It's a good thing that people are making more money right now. The economy is growing. And yes, it's uncomfortable that we have high inflation. So we should really hone in on this high inflation. And yeah, I forgot what the original question was. What do you think is supporting? Oh yeah, what do you think is supporting the U.S. economy right now? So I guess my answer is investment in AI is fueling the U.S. economy. I have this fire hydrant here because that's like all the money that we're spending just on kind of solving problems that we haven't been solving in a long time. Like we have all this outdated infrastructure. There are natural disasters. Here, look, there's fires happening in Spokane right now. All of these homes are going to be rebuilt. On paper, that is economic growth because that burning down a house creates jobs. I know it's like so sick, but it's true. When homes burn down, jobs are created. That doesn't feel good, but it does create economic growth and it employs people. So this is like kind of the economy that we're in right now, unfortunately. But it's one where there's a lot where there's jobs to be had. Unemployment is not as high as it was in the early 2000s, but it doesn't mean that like people's lives are necessarily better. All right. Speaking of climate change, there is this really cool paper that came out um, that shows that it's called the price and distributional impacts of flood risk disclosure evidence from U.S. housing platforms. Okay, so background on this. Back in 2020, First Street Foundation, or which is now called First Street, they came up with all these ratings for homes that rate their flood risk. They started with flood risk, and then they expanded to other climate risks. This product, they sold it to Redfin. We have First Street ratings on every single home listing that tell you the flood risk and other risks like fire risk, air quality risk, all of that. But there was this period where before people didn't have access to these climate scores on these real estate portals like Redfin and Zillow and Realtor. And then by 2021, all of these portals, including Redfin, had at least flood risk on their websites, and more climate risks were rolled out. So this paper looks at what was the impact on prices, and they use something called a regression discontinuity design, where basically what they looked into is that these rating scores, they come in different categories. You can have severe risk, extreme risk, mild risk, moderate risk. But beneath those labels, there is a continuum of risk. Like it's not just these categories. There's like homes that have 99% risk versus 98, 97, etc. So they looked at the cutoffs between these categories, between severe and extreme, where homes had similar ratings, but they just were above or below these different cutoffs, to see what the impact was of these ratings themselves. And they were able to exploit the fact that websites like Redfin and Realtor and Zillow rolled out these ratings at different times in order to calculate the impact on the market. And I should say that I wrote a paper with my co-authors at USC and Columbia and MIT, looking into just Redfin's role in this. When we launched our flood scores on Redfin, we actually did an experiment where half of our users saw the flood scores and half didn't. And we found that people who were searching for severely risky homes went on to buy homes with half as much risk when they saw the flood scores. And so this is a follow-up paper to that research. It actually cites our research. And they found that homes labeled as extreme experienced a 3.3% discount and stay on the market a week longer relative to those labeled as severe risk. This is like a big deal. 3.3% is a lot. They found that the effects are strongest for coastal properties. And they also found that buyers of extreme risk homes have 5.3% lower income and are more likely to use FHA financing and are older. That's so interesting to me because it's exactly what you would expect. Once people become more aware of risk factors, the people who can afford to buy a different home are going to do that. And that drops the prices of the extremely risky homes. Those extremely risky homes go down in price, making them more affordable to lower income people. And then more lower income people sort into those extremely risky homes. It's also interesting that it's older people, because that just makes intuitive sense, right? Like if you're 70 years old, you are going to be around for a shorter amount of time. You're not going to live to see the most severe consequences of sea level rise, climate change, et cetera, et cetera. So this is exactly what you would expect. Now I understand that like this raises a lot more issues, right? Like I am a big believer in information transparency. I think that if these scores exist and like everybody should be able to see them because the insurance companies are looking at these scores. We know that for a fact. Insurance companies are customers of First Street. So they use these scores to set insurance rates. They're using them to assess risk. And I believe that consumers should have the same access to information. Now, this information is not going to be perfect. As I described before, you have a continuum of risk, but most people fixate on the labels: severe, extreme, moderate, mild. Even though there are going to be homes that are like just on the cutoff between getting one label versus another, people are going to fixate on the labels instead of digging into the underlying data, which we do have on the website. Like you can dig in and see like the risk over time. But it tells us something about what's going to happen to real estate markets as climate change, flood risk, other risks become more apparent to people. What's going to happen, according to this paper, or what you can extrapolate from this paper, is that homes that are more risky are going to go down in price, and people who are lower income are going to be more inclined to buy those lower priced homes, whereas people with more income will be more inclined to buy the homes with less risk, even if they cost more. And it just makes me feel so many different types of ways. It's not surprising to me that that's the result that they found, but then you have to think about the policy implications moving forward. What does it mean if people who are lower income are sorting into homes with higher risk? That means that they will be even more vulnerable to climate change. It means that there might be even more people who need government assistance in order to get out of harm's way or to rehab their homes once their homes are damaged. And I don't think that like we're anywhere close to really being able to grapple with these issues. I always say that like climate change is going to be felt first in the housing market. People think of climate change as this abstract risk. It won't be abstract when your insurance costs go up, and it won't be abstract when your house is flooded or your house is burned down. So we're just really at the beginning of this, but it's already showing up in this data. And I will say that like Zillow took these climate risks off their website. I forget if they put them back on or not. And I think Compass, they said something recently about like these types of this type of information being detrimental to sellers, but it's beneficial to buyers, obviously. So it's going to get messy. There aren't easy answers here. I'm not saying I have the answers here and that like one way is objectively better than the other in terms of disclosing risk, but I always lean towards we should give people the information even when the information may be imperfect. Okay, because some information is better than no information. And at least the people who are buying these homes at higher risk, they know what they're getting themselves into. But economically, because they're low income, they might not have the choice to protect themselves, or they might not have the resources to protect themselves. I guess they could choose to be renters. That's another alternative. Is that maybe this isn't study this, and there's no way for them to study it. But I would assume that there is some portion of buyers who realized that the only homes that were in their budget were these extremely risky homes, and they decided to rent instead because they didn't want to take on that risk. So that might have been a positive outcome that, or at least like in terms of risk, a positive outcome that isn't being featured here. Yeah, this is the full paper. I just wanted to show you. Look, it says, can I close this? Wait, where'd it go? I just wanted to bask in the fact that it says Fairweather et al. Here. This is my first citation. When I left academia, I left academia, I graduated with a PhD and went into the private sector. I thought that, I would never be cited in an NBER working paper, National Bureau of Economics Research working paper, but here it is, Fairweather et al. I want to frame it or something, but I just wanted to show it off. Okay, people asking questions. I should go back to the questions. Oh my God, there's so many questions. All right, somebody said we are in a K-shaped economy with consumer spending being pushed up by top 10%. I don't know how to respond to that. Analysts are saying the U.S. is already in recession, but but they're not accepting it. I haven't seen that. I mean, we are like in a construction recession. There's no new construction happening. I guess if like the AI bubble were to burst, we would probably enter into a recession if all of that AI investment just goes away instantaneously. But I don't know. I don't think you can say that like we're already in a recession, but maybe. I don't know. I guess if you have a much higher estimation of inflation, and I acknowledge that, like, I go off of the CPI and the PCE. Those are the measures of inflation that the Federal Reserve uses, but you could come up with different ways to measure inflation. Inflation is supposed to measure how much overall prices are increasing, but there are different weights that you could apply to different baskets of goods to come up with different numbers. And I know that there are numbers out there that suggest that inflation is higher than what the Fed is estimating. And then when you look at GDP and you adjust for inflation, if you have this higher inflation number, then you can like construct a measure of inflation that shows that we are in a recession. So I don't doubt that, like, I guess it's plausible that we like maybe we're in a recession. It doesn't feel like it though. Like, I feel like recessions have much higher unemployment than what we have right now. But maybe it's like so mild you can't see it. And in that case, like, is it a recession if it's so mild that you can't see it? I don't know. Okay. All right, well, let's move on to other things. Oh man, I'm almost out of time. This went so fast. I have a call in a couple of minutes, so sometimes I like to go long. So what do I want to talk about? Oh, yes. Okay. So Econ Sarah PhD, she's a TikToker economist. She tagged me in this clip of Kevin Hassett saying that one of the metrics of shelter costs that I find most interesting is that they're going down pretty rapidly in places like California because everyone is leaving. Even though there are high prices in California, it puts downward pressure on inflation because everybody is leaving the state. I don't know if Econ Sarah tagged me on this to like debunk this, but I agree. I agree with Hassett. He's not wrong. Inflation in California is lower than it is, or at least so during the evidence I'm going off of is during the pandemic. I think what he's saying is like a little bit outdated because nobody's moving right now because of how high mortgage rates are. But during the pandemic, when everybody was moving and people were leaving California because they had remote jobs and they could leave this high cost state to other low cost states, the places that people were moving to, like Austin and Nashville and Florida, had higher rates of inflation than the places that they were leaving, like California. People who had these high incomes in California were taking their money and spending it, moving to Texas, Florida, Arizona, wherever they were moving. And they had all this money that was never in those local economies before. More money chasing a limited supply of goods and services, that drives up prices. That's where inflation comes from. And that money leaving California meant that there was less money in California to drive up prices. So we actually did a study about this at Redfin, and we found exactly what Hassett said, which is that migration destinations had higher inflation than the places that people were leaving. I don't really know like what to take away from that. It's not good when people are leaving the state and taking their money with them, even if it gets you lower inflation. And places that attract a lot of people, they have to deal with higher inflation. They have to deal with higher home prices, and they have to deal with like more money chasing fewer amounts of goods and services, which makes cost of living higher for all the residents that are there. So, you can see he has this like cute little smile. I don't know what he's smiling about, but I do agree with what he said. Okay, let me just look at the questions one last time before I sign off. And I will say, please like, subscribe to whatever channel you're watching. If you feel the impulse to go look at my other social media channels, I would say go subscribe to me on YouTube, because that's like, I think, the best platform from this kind of live streaming, although the other ones are good too. Get my book, Hate the Game. Go look on Redfin. Go look at those scores. Go look up your own flood score, climate score, see what your risk is, and see all the other data that we have there. And also there's a lot of data and housing market news on Redfin News and Redfin Data Center. So those are all my plugs. Someone asked what I think about rent control. I think that rent control is something that should only be used to address renter exploitation, but should not be a policy to keep rents affordable. What I mean by that is, like, it is bad on landlords if they like get a tenant, let's say they charge the tenant $500 a month for rent, and then a year comes around, they jack it up to $600. That's not nice. Don't do that to people. Like, they were expecting their rent to be one thing. Now they're in this super hard decision where they have to decide whether they're going to move. Moving is expensive. They're going to have to spend thousands of dollars moving, or spend, $100 extra a month, $1,200 a year to stay in the same apartment. That is exploitative. Okay. But when the market rent literally increases that much, we have to focus on building more housing, not restricting housing supply, because it only helps the people who are currently in apartments. It does nothing for the people who are looking for apartments. That's my issue with rent control. So I'm not like black and white against rent control. I think it has its role, but it should really be focused on making sure that tenants are not being exploited by their landlords. It should not be a policy for keeping housing affordable more broadly. Someone asked, when is my next live stream? I do these every single Thursday. I think starting in September, when my kids are finally back in school, I'm going to up it to twice a week. I think I'm going to have one part that's about like current events, and then one part that's about more economic research, but I'm kind of playing with it. Feel free to leave a comment and let me know what format you think works best. But yeah, I do this every Thursday for now, and I think maybe in a couple of weeks when my kids are back in school, I will increase the frequency to twice a week. Maybe I'll get up to 3 times a week. Maybe this is like what I do now. I'm a live streamer now. Never thought that would happen. Okay, any other comments? If not, I'm out of time. So let me just hide this. Get my book, yada yada, Redfin.